Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. How's it going? It's a Thursday. We're rocking and rolling again. Back in it with another topic. Any
two main differences. Seth smiled, and I didn't look left.
like, boom.
So we're really spicy.
We're crazy. I was actually kind of thrown off this morning, but I was like looking at this going, everyone's actually looking at me for once. This is crazy. We're all smiling.
We smile when you smile, Mike.
Exactly. But we try.
Yeah.
I know what a silent hand slap looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, glad you guys are paying attention when we go live. We are.
You know, it should be our thing from now on. We should all be doing something really weird, like you know, picking your face, looking off in the sky, just never. Oh, hello. You know, we actually showed up here.
Like, I just randomly showed up on YouTube. Like,
so unplanned to find you guys all here
Yeah.
at this time with your coffee ready to go.
And microphone.
Couple, let's call it a couple quick hitters here, I guess, on the announcements or news things that are coming across the wire here. I guess it's June. The June Power BI desktop is now officially out. There's a blog post about it right now. Couple things that pique my interest. The new format pane, whether you like it or hate it, is now generally available. It is out, is officially live. And the other one that I think I would point out is there is now a new button. Your data connectivity and preparation now can connect directly to a data mart. So right from PowerBI.com. So that has been updated as well. Anyways, there's also a connector update for Azure Databricks. And Databricks has a brand new connector, which is interesting. So I'm going to have to play around with those because I use Databricks quite heavily.
I guess they're pushing the data march thing.
No, that's just supporting it fully.
Yep, agreed. You can't let that thing get released and not have support.
They've actually been incrementally updating the Databricks connector. Just kind of, it's usually way at the bottom of the blog, but so this one's more prominent. Like they have a brand new one, or it's just another big enhancement to it.
Well, they said there's two updates. There's an Azure Databricks connector update. So Azure connection only is an update, but they said there's a brand new connector for Databricks.
Oh, like an independent.
Yeah, like that.
So it can work from other ecosystems.
Sounds like it. It says authentication with AWS or OAuth on AWS Preview.
Yeah.
So that's
the AWS version.
Yep.
That's cool.
Now
there are no updates on Databricks in the blog article. I didn't see though, except for the desktop connection to it.
Yeah, it's just connection. It's not like Databricks updating things. Databricks is updating stuff independently. I think they're on like version 11 now. That's crazy what they're doing, but seems like there's a couple other connection updates there as well.
No, there are no data mart updates.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, you said Databricks, and I was like, well, yeah, because it's not really a Microsoft tool. But
yeah, you should go read the Azure blog, guy. Like, yeah.
Exactly.
So, no major data mart updates, but you can connect to it now. Even though technically you could before, just it was under the Power BI data sets.
Interesting.
We're splitting hairs there.
I didn't know this, but I'm looking at the blog right now. There's actually a whole section for embedded analytics, which I believe that's Power BI embedded. There's like 5 feature releases. They're talking specifically around embedded stuff. I didn't even know they were doing like announcements around embedded release stuff.
They always have a developer section.
Yeah.
Maybe they added a little bit more detail this month. There's some things like support for embedding pagina reports with single sign-on, support for passing report parameters to pagina reports in JavaScript with the SDK. I'm very in tune with the embedded stuff because I do that a lot, and so I'm always looking to see like what Microsoft is producing, so I can connect more things up to the API level.
More metric updates too. So, which is again,
AKA goals.
AKA goals, AKA metrics.
AKA metrics.
AKA metrics. So whatever they want to call it.
Yes.
But the big one, well, there's I think 2 major ones. One is you can now set a goal as a categorical. It doesn't have to be a number. Which
interesting.
So I'm gonna figure out how to set up your data model to do that. If you're like, good, great, that's your goal. Hopefully that's not your goal, but
okay.
I don't know.
Measurement.
Yeah.
What's the difference between good and great?
Right. Maybe that needs a little refinement
well,
there.
We always meet it, that's for sure. So
instead of getting letter grades, we're gonna give you just random scoring something.
Wasn't there a book about that? From good to great or something?
I'm sure that's the title of a book, but I don't know the book you're talking about.
I'll buy that for you, Tom.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
Expect it in the mail.
one of 1,000 book titles
Yeah,
that probably
right.
have that self-help book. Yeah,
Now, Seth,
would be great in the kitchen. Yeah,
you've got an interesting topic here. You were kind of working around with some API stuff that you thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, dovetailing off of some of the original work, and I should have prepped up who specifically, but I know there were a couple tutorials on how do you execute refreshes out of ADF into models. But
Hmm?
if people aren't aware, there were some pretty big REST API improvements
Yeah.
that were announced, and you can check that out on the Microsoft blog on June 2nd, I think. And one of the biggest ones was not only like executing a refresh has been possible for a while, but one of the bigger ones that has always been painful is once it's going, how do you stop it? Right.
Yes.
And
yeah.
there's actually a cancel and in progress operation that's supported in the REST APIs now. So as I've been digging into and ensuring that like we're setting up um, pipeline to finish model to execute, as opposed to having timings kind of overlap and you miss data refreshes and things like that.
Hmm?
Been digging into and seeing a lot of improvements
so you can
in the
grab the
APIs.
status.
Mm-hmm.
Well-
Lots of capabilities
Well, the whole thing
that they've added.
when you started a refresh, so like for example, I think when you kicked off a refresh, I think it was from the service, I believe. I'm not sure if it did the same thing when you kicked
Mhm.
it off from an API, but when you said go, Power BI would try to refresh the data set and it would go for a period of time, and it has an automatic timeout of 2 hours. So if your data set takes longer than 2 hours to refresh, it says, sorry, we're out of time, and it kills it and says it fails it. But the system has an automatic retry 3 times. So you could get a refresh that tries to last for 6 hours, but it's doing the same refresh 3 times essentially. And there was really no cancel refresh API endpoint. So everyone had all these kind of hacks. Like you had to like go into like the XML endpoint, and you had to like force it to do this single thing with this command script, and then it would stop, and then you had to do it 2 more times. So you actually had to fail it 3 times for it to actually completely stop what it was doing. But the only way you could see all that was like if you were looking at like the tracing of the endpoint or SQL profiler and watching the system and what it was doing, so you could actually see like, oh, it's actually stopping working, as opposed to So this is a much better solution where it's like
It's also
seems so duh, like yes.
they're also directly supporting refreshing of individual tables and partitions, right? And there have been some really creative solutions that have been put out there, I think, by a couple of MVPs around using PowerShell commands and things to make that work without it. But this is I think one of those. As the tool is enhancing, they're innovating and making some of those harder to do workarounds just part of the platform.
Yeah.
Right? So lots of good stuff in there.
I'm putting some links to some other documentation. There's a documentation page around enhanced refreshing with the Power BI REST API. So giving you kind of like the detailed documentation, batching commits, table and partition level refreshes, applying incremental refresh policies, which for me, I think the nugget here for me is apply the incremental refresh policy, because that applying the policy doesn't refresh all the tables. So if you have a data set and you want to push it to the service, you can call the endpoint for apply incremental refresh policies, which just makes the partitions, and that's it. And then what you can do once you have that, then you can hit refresh, and only if you have an incremental refreshing table, it'll only load the table based on the incremental refresh identified policy. So if you have 2 years of data and you're partitioning by month, this simplifies that whole example, so it's much easier to consume.
Can it be triggered by something in terms of like all your data sets that are currently refreshing, or do you have to call a particular data set every time?
I think this is going to be data set by data set specific, because you're actually producing, I believe I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
When you look at the base URL that they're providing, you have to provide it the group number and the data set ID. So it's the group and data set ID that you would need to use to do that. We have a process running for one of our clients where we have like 15 data sets that need to refresh at the end of a Azure Data Factory pipeline. And so we don't use this API because it wasn't really out at the time. We use some other stuff that Microsoft provided to us, but we use an API where we trigger the data set to refresh, and we have to manually log in all of the data sets that we want to refresh. And then the pipeline runs, does all the Databricks things up front. And then at the end, it says, okay, we're done. Go get the data and refresh the model. And then we can trigger these data sets to refresh. And then it will load everything into memory.
Yeah, because I'm looking for a better solution. Right now, we use Power Automate and the emails that you get for failures. And it basically triggers off a flow to like update a Slack channel to say, hey, this was broken.
Oh, interesting. That's cool.
So, but the only thing is you have to specify every like the email subject line and what the data set is. So each one that you want, not necessarily everything in a workspace, which would be interesting.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
And another thing I got a request for on. Do you guys know of any? Where would I find where would you guys put logging for when any data set failed anywhere in your tenant? Do you have where would you guys look for that information? I know there's logging. I know you can go into the log analytics for Power BI, and that will log everything that happens to Power BI, no matter what. And I think you can put alerts inside that system, maybe. But are there other places you guys would go find
for real time?
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Like
we use PowerShell and the API for the refresh. So I actually have like a Power Automate desktop that runs the activity.
Yeah.
It runs the users with licenses, and then it runs the refresh for every workspace and iterates over it, pulls into CSV, updates the report, so I can actually see like the previous week, the refresh by workspace by data set. But it's not real time.
So you're not using the scheduled refreshing from PowerBI.com. You're basically running all that independently.
This is the history.
Oh, you're pulling the history of things. Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So once a day you're doing that?
No, I open every desktop file on my computer and click refresh.
And then publish them all directly from desktop.
Yes. There was a time where all of our connections were ODBC back in like 17. And that's what the gateway didn't work. So that's what we had to do every morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yuck.
Yeah, this is kind of the next evolution for me, but we'll probably try if everything is planned out with us getting engaged with REST API, we'll probably try to pull the refresh history through there.
What systems are you going to use? Are you going to create your own application to kind of like, in a sense, extract that information? Or
we'll see. The intent here without getting
too far in the weeds,
without having done it yet, right? Is you should be able to execute all these things via ADF.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Correct.
Well, I know who's doing the next user group meeting.
when I get it all set up.
February 2024.
Wow.
We were just talking about how much sarcasm is used. Those two comments right there are like amazing. There's like so much sarcasm being thrown back and forth. Incredible. You didn't get that joke because you don't understand sarcasm. Amazing. Awesome. Well, let's jump into some of our main topic today. I think this is a good transition. Unless there's anything else, any other kind of openers, things that are like interesting on your mind. Okay, so I think we're good. Let's jump into our topic of the day, talking kind of around implementation usage scenarios for Power BI. So this is going to be an interesting topic. Tommy, you found this article, and we'll go grab the article and stick it out here for everyone to read so they can see what's going on here. Actually, I think I've got it here. I'll try and drop this into the chat window. Give us some background, Tommy. Like, what's your thought for this topic?
So, I don't want to get credit for finding this article because I think everyone has found this article. It's on Microsoft documentation. Again, the two most amazing people we talk about, Melissa Coates and Matthew Roach, are the authors of this. And we've talked a heck of a bunch about the adoption.
Are they though? Like, if we're going to credit, let's credit. There's a single contributor to all of this article, who is Peter Myers. So pretty sure Peter's been heavily engaged in a lot of this documentation and output.
I will concede that without having any skin in the game, but yes. Well, I do see Matthew Roach's face in the first article in a YouTube video
under introduction, but he may just be calling him out.
Yeah. So the three of them, Peter Myers, Matthew Roach, Melissa Coates. This goes on the heels of the adoption planning articles that we have dived into a heck of a bunch. And this is really about, okay, we've talked about data culture, we've talked about governance, but there's that whole other blueprint side of this where how do you actually in a sense, now get your system to work or that culture to work, or how are you actually going to roll out Power BI, not necessarily externally, which is what the adoption planning is about, but what systems and process are you going to put in place for your team, for yourself to, in a sense, connect the data, deploy your reports. And it really dives into, I think, about 6 different scenarios, like team BI, self-service BI,
Yes.
enterprise BI.
I think it's good to segment what these things mean and define
Yeah.
them in a various areas. Because I think when we talk about like, oh, everything should be governed this way, or oh, we should have a process about this. I think these types of business lines or implementation directions really influence your lens on how you think you should build
Right.
whatever the whole Power BI environment. I really like these. Yeah, keep going, Tommy. This is good.
I don't know. I see that Matthew's on. So, well, Seth, why don't you kind of bring up the rear?
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure, man. All
No
of a sudden,
pressure.
are you gonna cast it over?
Yeah, I spoke enough.
I think in general, the same way that we spent a bunch of time on the adoption roadmap, the time spent in these articles and documentation to just kind of review them and point them out is where there's a lot of value, right? So in going through this, the top areas, right, are kind of content collaboration and delivery, right? Because there are multiple facets of the
Yeah.
Power BI ecosystem, and it's really easy for us to talk about report writing, how, like best practices, ways in which we share, et cetera, because we're taking, I think, a lot of our experiences doing implementation. But this type of conversation is great because it takes a step back and it kind of forces us to reevaluate like all of the different pieces, right? Like here's a structure that's been laid out to help those that aren't as familiar, right? Or don't have the experience of implementing a bunch of different solutions in different environments with an idea of what are all the pieces? Like what do I need to think about as I'm going to launch Power BI into my ecosystem, right? So, the two, high level things in terms of the usage scenarios that are pointed out are, like I said, the content collaboration and delivery, and then content management, right, and deployment. So we've kind of outlined in, I think, the adoption roadmap
Mhm.
that before you go and build all these areas and try to engage the business, it's typically a good idea to have an idea of the direction that you're headed, right?
Yeah.
Because if you want people to come along or you want them to operate in a certain scenario, you need to kind of have all your ducks in a row. And this, I think, takes it into the next level after adoption roadmap, but the same principles apply, right? As
Mhm.
we're talking about how we want to implement a solution or evaluate maybe where our solution is at, this bulk of articles is a good litmus of just kind of doing one of two things: one, helping guide you, as well as potentially, kind of shining a light on potential problem areas you have within your organization
100%.
with the implementation, not with people or process.
I mean, if you talk about the adoption roadmap talked a lot about like high level things, right? The center of excellence, the community of practice, what is the executive sponsor, and the importance of their role. It was kind of like a lot more of these like overarching themes.
Yeah.
How do you manage, like, what is, like, just defining like the language of what we're talking about when we're talking about self-service BI. What is content ownership? What does content delivery look like? Defining what those terms mean, because we're probably talking about them, but we're not doing much justice without having like a clear definition of what these things mean for all teams. This, I think, goes down to another level here. And so, kind of walking through the article here that they've got, um, they talk a little bit about how to use these different scenarios, like what's the planning involved here, um, how these scenarios focus on the kind of data culture that you have inside your organization. And I think this is an underrated statement here. I really like this concept of data culture because no matter where you're at, there is a data culture, regardless. Whether and it's driven by the people in your organization. Do people want to take on the responsibility of building their own reports, or do they just throw everything over the wall to a team that is expected to do their stuff? So that's part of the culture that lives there. So I think that's really interesting. Um, And then
There's
Oh, go ahead.
another point there though, right? Like
Okay.
you make the, do I care or do I throw it over the fence? I think there's a third, which is where a lot of people get stuck, and you, even myself, right? It's you just want to get stuff done, and you start implementing without the strategy, right? You're not thinking in long terms, and by nature, what you're doing is
Mm.
creating an inadvertent chaotic environment that you have to go fix at some point, as opposed to taking the pressure and, despite the pressure, taking the moment and think about where you want to end up, and saying, nope, I know I have to get this out the door, but spending the half a day to do this is going to ensure that I'm going to do that the right way.
Yeah.
And in all actuality, Mike, you're really good at this, because even as we've worked together
I'm
over the
lazy is what
years,
it boils down to.
but that's like you say, I'm a lazy
Not
engineer,
sarcastic.
but it's
I
the
hear you not
engineer parts.
I hear you're not
parts
disagreeing
where
with me
you're
here.
like, I'm about to go launch a production line. Maybe I should have all the pieces of the production line put in place before I start building the product.
Yes.
And you've always been really good at evaluating or pushing back. And I think it's something that, if you can't do it on your own, find a Mike in your organization.
I mean,
Still look for them. Yeah.
I think those are really good points, and I think there's something else I'd like from a simple standpoint, right? Let's just think about how do you get better at doing this? Like, even I love your point, Seth, and what my mind goes to is someone hears that and goes, "Oh my gosh, that's a great point." But how do I get to that? How do I get to a point where I can slow down and understand how to like build a better mousetrap so that way when I walk away, it's complete and it doesn't have to be repaired all the time. And I think for me, how I did it was even when I had mundane or simple requests, like simple things, just pull this data from these systems and put it together, or whatever those simple things were, even inside Excel, I forced myself to spend real time learning Power Query inside Excel. And even if I had I could have gotten to that Excel sheet, I could have opened it up, copy pasted, and made it's probably faster because I understood how to do that. But I challenged myself in those very early phases of like learning Power Query and data loading and data engineering to bring those things into Power Query and automate it. And my scenario that I use when I teach my class around Power BI, or particularly the ETL portion of Power Query side of things, is even in very simple tasks, at any time you're copying and pasting data between Excel sheets, you should start thinking about spending a little bit of time learning how you would do those data transformations, getting comfortable with Power Query and loading that stuff in, because more often than not, when you do some sort of one-off analysis for someone in the organization, how often does it come back to you like 1 week from now, 2 weeks from now? Hey, can you repeat that? Hey, next month, that was a great report you did. It's a great, we also have a problem again. Like, can you please redo it? So the number of times I've spent redoing my analysis, and then to me, it becomes this really clunky process of, okay, shoot, what did I do? How did I clean this stuff up? And then I like doing the process of the automation, and I would spend a little bit more time, but by doing that, as you repeat this over and over again, you become better, faster, more proficient just by default. And then it becomes just part of your normal workflow. And then you could outwork normal people doing like copy pasting stuff over and removing and like doing the manual cleaning. You can go faster than them. And then when the request comes across next time, you're like, yeah, sure, no problem. It'll be 30 minutes. You drop the files, pull the files, hit refresh, walk away, get a coffee, come back, boom, data's loaded, and you can go talk to people about your analysis. So.
Well, the complexity comes because that's that personal side, right? Where I've set up a process for myself for the requests that come to me. But where all of this gets very complex is now when you're dealing with other people on your team, or BI is across the team. There's a spread.
Yes.
How do you, in a sense, keep that? I'll call it the Indiana Jones rope of what's the process, what's the source, how do we make sure that we're consistent? I love
I'm not sure I understand the Indiana Jones rope analogy here.
So, okay,
you kind of threw that out there, and I'm like a little bit lost in that. What that means? Does that mean like
I'm sure everybody is?
Am I swinging across the chasm with a rope? Is what you're envisioning here? And I'm playing like what is that old game?
I'm pretty sure now it wasn't in the movie, but I'm
pretty sure I'm just making this up on the fly.
I'm making this up on the fly. I mean, that's what we do, though. That's
I'm picking you out here, Tommy.
Yes. So what I mean is going to the jungle, having the rope to identify where you came from. So if you're exploring,
okay, got it.
So it's making sure, like, if you're going down the cave, It's like, how do I actually get back out?
Gotcha.
So it's basically having your
Okay.
your rope. Yeah. So, and I'm pretty sure again
There was
that was
many more
not
things happening in Tommy's brain that did not get articulated, and I was lost.
There's a lot of things in Indiana Jones too. So yeah.
Yeah,
The
Pitfall.
Nazi. Yeah.
Joe,
Yeah.
Joe, that's exactly
Right,
where
the
my mind
Pitfall.
went. My mind went to
Right.
the old video
Oh.
game called Pitfall, where you're swinging on a rope across a bunch of alligators. Yeah, that's where I was thinking.
Not what I meant, but so well, let's see how this next part goes because
Awesome.
I like well, from what you guys are talking about and going through this series, I love the difference between the adoption roadmap and this. And what came to me multiple times was if the adoption roadmap was how to build a toy company and how to market it, where it's that culture, it's that true source consistency. This implementation planning is like, what toy are you building?
Yes.
Like, what product are you building? Because very much this is the juice, this is the source of what are we going to be delivering on a consistent basis, not necessarily the report or the design, but this all
Yes.
comes from it.
Yeah.
On how we deliver it, but also if my BI team is spread out across department or centralized or however your mix is, there should be a consistent way of what are we producing.
And I don't
yeah.
I was gonna say I don't feel like there's sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But I don't feel like there's like these, to me, I look at these things and I read it. The first time I read it, feel like, okay, interesting. And then I read it again and I had to go back and take another look at it because there were like high level buckets of this. And I think there are actually ways you can mix and match different portions of this based on what's happening in your organization. For example, like there's a couple main headers here in the introduction. So if you go into usage scenarios and you go into the usage scenario overview, which is kind of where I'm pulling some of the content here from this one, you can see that content collaboration and delivery, that's kind of one whole area, right? If you're just talking about distributing existing content, you have personal BI, team BI, and departmental and enterprise. These are kind of different modes of how you would distribute the content. Makes total sense. But then there's this concept of self-service BI scenarios. So this is managed self-service or customizable self-service or self-service data preparation or advanced data preparation. I can't say words. But to me, like this makes a lot of sense also because you can have a mix of a team that is regularly producing content collaboration elements, but then a part of your organization or department in your organization might be leveraging more of the self-service BI scenarios. And so I think these go hand in hand. And then it keeps going on in the article talking about content management. How do you deploy the content, right? So that could potentially be another whole topic by itself. Are there things in your organization that is real time? What is real time? I mean, how do we define that? You know, is this just 4 refreshes per day, or are we talking something that needs to happen within a couple minutes? Like, what does that define as? And then there's this last step here, which I love, love this part, is the embedding in hybrid scenarios. That to me, I think there adds a lot of value there as well for organizations about this concept of leveraging the model and the reports and putting them in your existing application. So I feel like, yes, there were like 4 key topic areas here, but I think these can actually live together at the same time.
Well,
talk to me through that.
But this is the challenge. I mean, ultimately, for our listeners, we just ripped through the entirety of the usage scenarios. Glad you joined us. Thank you.
And we're done.
I honestly think
you should be a master at this now. Yes.
So high level across these areas. Let's take our time, right? Even if this turns into multiple podcasts, I think
probably
there's
will.
a wealth of information in here, plus linking that I'd like to follow through. But the point I'd like to make here initially is like this is to me where a lot of the challenges and things that we come up with or talk through come into play, where we're trying to create a data culture in an organization, right? So organizationally, you have to have an idea of what these structures are going to support, a process to follow, et cetera. But when the rubber hits the road, i.e. implementation, one of the biggest challenges or areas of opportunity I think we have is how do we engage business users, right? And bring them up to speed and along for the ride, right? Because to me, while like the collaboration and how Power BI gets used in an organization, if we're talking about like personal and team, right? I think is where some of the biggest impact can happen. Albeit we talk a lot in departmental and enterprise because that's where a lot a lot of our work streams go.
Hmm?
But I wanna look at like these two areas, personal BI and team BI, in the context of like the next section of self-service BI scenarios, and like dive into those areas of bringing some of our expertise and like thoughts around how we train people or bring them up to speed as somebody introduces this into an organization, because I think that's where the vast majority of people are going to be, is how do I get Power BI to be used more?
Mhm.
And like those key parts, I guess, are going to be where everybody's going to be stepping in, and where I'd like to just kind of
Yeah.
spend a bunch of time.
Seth, let me ask you, Mike's scenario with the Excel and doing the Power Query for his users, does that go under personal BI to you, or is that the self-service?
Excel and Power
It
Query
doesn't
So-
as
fit.
data
It doesn't
sources
fit in
now?
one of them though. That's so if you
Yeah,
Matthew's saying some
no.
comments here. He goes, if he says there's always there will be overlap between these different areas. So if you say Excel
100%,
and where
sure.
that sits, right? Well, that is every time you're doing your own analysis, yeah, you're squarely in self-service. So I would call that's part of the that is a fitting scenario for self-service BI, as well as it fits in the content collaboration around personal BI. You have a high level of control around the report that you're doing. It's kind of in your own ecosystem. But when you read through the content collaboration scenarios that you described, Seth, I like the delineation between personal, team, departmental, and enterprise based on the deployment that's happening. Personal BI is like your pro license. You use it's private usage. It's almost like saying personal BI is like using my workspace or having a dedicated workspace that is just for you. You're not sharing with anyone. And then team BI is using the workspaces as the creation and content sharing tool. So that's like, now we're talking about workspaces that everyone can see and view. And then departmental units start talking about, hey, let's talk about what an app is. This is where there's a creator team, and then there's an app being produced that is distributed to the company. And then enterprise BI draws the line between, we're now not talking about pro users, we're now talking about like premium users, like dedicated capacity, going after embedding, high levels of read-only consumers, lots of readers, and then a team that's dedicated around specific things that are creating content. And I really like the delineation between
it's
those.
not chronological though.
What do you mean?
Let me ask a question here, right? And maybe hopefully this elicits some of where my thoughts are. What are prerequisites in your mind that you would want to engage a company in before you started launching the implementation of Power BI? Like content
Prerequisite.
collaboration. We can talk
Yeah.
about personal BI
Yeah.
and team BI, right? And the structures within those that, or show people how to navigate the system and what features and tools to use. But what are there any prerequisites,
Yeah.
for implementing?
Yeah. I mean, I think
Are you
right
talking-
off the bat.
Are you talking about like going up the stream here on like, I'm not sure if I follow like your question there. So you're saying, are there
I'm saying to me the challenge in what the, and maybe I'm just in my own world here, which could entirely be
Use an
possible.
Indiana Jones reference for context.
Yes, exactly. Are
So-
we swinging on a rope over some alligators? That's what I need to know.
I think maybe where I'm drawing or starting to draw a correlation here is the implementation of personal BI requires upfront training for users to understand how they would go about building reports, right? Do we want to dive into that, or is it let's just talk about the structures of what personal BI looks like for somebody that wants to use it? Because it's not effective unless you hit that first part, which is, do they know how to use it?
See,
I
it's interesting.
well,
Yeah.
I think your level of effectiveness will vary depending on how competent your team members or your users of Power BI are. I think so. Part of the mantra of Microsoft is 5 minutes to wow, regardless. So with very little knowledge of Power BI, it should be fairly straightforward to get some value out of the tool immediately. I would also argue that the more you learn about Power BI, the more you could think about better value being generated by the tool. Period. I definitely think that's a correlated thing. But I don't think this article, to me, in my mind, none of this is addressing the general knowledge of the self-service BI individual. This just assumes you roughly know how to get value out of the tool, and these are just different modes by which you're going to allowing the organization to work in. So I
No,
definitely
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, another. I was gonna say, think of our grow up stories with this.
Yeah,
This is all the stuff where, like, back in my day, I didn't have any implementation scenario
yeah,
guidelines. Like, we were just analysts. Someone said, "Hey, there's a thing called Power BI," and you downloaded it and you started doing it.
yep,
And we had a natural progression to get to this,
yes,
but we did not have this roadmap. So think about to use your point, the prerequisites,
yes,
right? I think everyone, at least from my background, everyone downloaded Power BI. There was this service, we bought licenses, and we just started creating reports based on request. It was very individualized. There was not like, hey, we need to set up a process now,
yeah,
right? When Power in 2015 and 2016, it was, hey, what's this tool? Look at all the cool stuff. Hey, look, I can make the page 3 pages long
yeah,
and 18 pie charts. And then over time, the natural mistakes that you would make where, hey, you're reporting leads, oh, and you're reporting leads, and the numbers are different. Uh-oh, maybe we should do something about that. It was a very natural process to get to a point where we need a process. We need a way to do this,
sure.
but we didn't have that, but we still kind of, in a sense, got to it. So yeah.
Maybe I'm missing your question, Seth, a
So
little bit.
nope. I think it's framing, right?
Okay.
So in our chat, I just posted kind of what I'm looking at, which is the drill into personal BI,
Yeah,
right? Which
sure.
has the diagram of the analytics for an individual. So if this is the framework, a general framework for personal BI and what that looks like, maybe where I'm driving is let's talk about this framework,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
And maybe we want to post this in the chat,
I did already.
for those that are following along. But ultimately, like, let's talk about what are the key components that we would need to convey, train, share with users as we would implement this personal BI kind of diagram. Does that make sense?
It does. I think when you said, though, the team, like personal and teams, my,
Well, team is the next one, right? So it has a little bit more structure about how you would train people to use a workspace,
okay.
right? But fundamentally, in order for personal BI to work, what are the fundamentals that need to happen? Like,
Well,
I think the fundamentals are the individual users need to have some ability to understand what's going on in the Power BI desktop, right? How do they function within that ecosystem? There's weeks worth of training,
Yeah,
right?
yes. You should
totally
probably know how
agree.
to use Power BI before you can implement it.
Well, and I've been getting a lot of
Yeah.
questions from people like, "Hey, where do I start with Power BI? How do I get going? Like, where's the beginning part for me?" And I've been actually doing a lot of, I've been going through myself the Microsoft Learn. There's like a Microsoft Learn areas around Power BI, introduction to Power BI.
Sure.
Like to
And maybe
me,
that's a really good point.
I
Personal use, like the framework for this is
yes,
go click on the book, the ribbon, learning, help, and
yes.
that's where this journey starts.
Exactly right. So I think for me, like, so I mean, I also agree though, like if you just gave someone Power BI desktop and they're already like love Excel and they're already kind of comfortable there, like I'm kind of that's my assumption because that's where I came from. If you give them Power BI, yeah, they won't understand filter context immediately. They'll understand how to make a sum potentially. There might be like you need enough information to figure out how to make a measure, but going through one of those basic classes shows you how to build a visual, how to load some data, how to create some stuff. Go to a dashboard in a day. Dashboard in a day class starts you doing a little bit of data engineering. You get a little flavor of like what can happen in Power Query, and then you get a couple measures, and you're building a couple visuals and rearranging them on the page. So to me, that covers the fundamentals. So a day solid of just kind of working through that dashboard in a day gives you like flavors of what can happen. But later on, I think the amount of effort you spend learning Power BI is the amount of value you can get out of it. The more you learn Power BI, the more value you can extract using that tool.
So
I agree, but how do we create? I guess where I'm getting at is prerequisite for personal BI, right? Okay, it's the learning tab and understanding how
Yep.
you build a report, and then how you would go view that report, right? Like where's the push, or is this the framework push to say, hey, once you built your report, go push that out to your workspace, because then you can understand that there's a whole component called the service.
Yes.
Because the fundamentals of these things, if they follow it all the way through, should provide some context for how they would then go to the next level. And I think it is, which is where you start collaboration with team members, right?
Agreed. Yes.
But what I've seen, and I have the perfect example every day, because my wife started a new job where Power BI is the bank, the thing. And the leap from personal, or technically she starts in this team framework where she's consuming reports, has some, experience with other people generating things, and then people are starting to send desktop files to her. And it's like, okay, well, somewhere along the line here we just missed what should have happened, which is we should have had people start in the personal realm, like be a consumer of reports, but start in a personal realm so you understand the fundamentals. Because if you don't, then you're not going to be able to work well within this team collaboration area.
I think I'm struggling with the question, or within the context of the series of the articles. And I'll explain myself here. So, not that I necessarily don't agree that you obviously need a starting point from the personal BI, but I'm struggling to isolate it in my head. Mainly because regardless if you set personal or team, or you already run into an organization well used, there has to be, to me, the prerequisite you're talking about. It's not necessarily desktop from implementation. That's a skill. It's expectations in the organization. Because if you're doing the personal BI in that example of people sending desktop files, obviously, if you're a beginner in Power BI, you're really going to be focused on learning the tool, learning the platform. But if you're in the context of the articles, implementing this in an organization, in a small company, wherever you're doing with more than one person at a given place, you have to begin to think about, and at least have this set up some framework of how you're going to implement it, or and have a process, and thus have expectations where you have to have something written down. You have to have your objectives and goals of what Power BI is going to be. Where, hey, I have one great report, people are using it, great, I send them the desktop. Well, you have to think a little farther than that, especially not.
Isn't that the intent of this conversation? I mean,
Yeah, well,
folks can go in here and read and look at the diagrams, but
sure,
what we're, I guess where I wanted to take the conversation further is, hey, not necessarily here's a scenario diagram of what personal BI looks like, and this is what team BI looks like. It's the if you're going to come in and see these frameworks,
sure.
what are the things we can discuss that enhance or would level up your understanding of these points, so that when you're going to roll this stuff out, that there are some key things you would want in here,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
And I guess that's what I'm driving at.
Okay. So
Yeah, I think that's.
I would then
I would
I'll
say,
iterate the
to,
expectations.
but to me, this feels out of scope of this article. Like this, to me, this is not assuming, like this is not assessing your skill levels in team, Power BI, personal,
Not
and
what I'm
department.
saying. It's
Yeah.
not what I'm. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm not saying like level up or skills, or that we're discussing that. I'm saying what is the in between in these diagrams that we can bring forward and say these are key parts that you need to understand if you're going to go implement this
Gotcha.
pretty
It's like
diagram.
the success factors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'll double down on expectations. Where on each part, whether you're looking at the diagram or you're reading this, it's one thing to internalize that knowledge and what's the content of the articles. But if you're going to actually then set out a plan, or set out a process or a project to do so, You have to have the expectations, whether it's just for yourself, for the team, and more importantly, for the organization, on what they are going to expect. How will they get the content? How should they know when to look for how long it takes to build any content? How does the team connect to data? When do we expect to, be able to build a report? So to me, that's where I would double down. That would be my number, regardless if this is personal BI or enterprise. I think it starts with setting the expectations and making sure they're clearly communicated internally
here's
and in the organization.
But here's where
saying.
I'm getting, like, you guys, I see what you're saying. I think I understand what you're trying to get to. But my biggest pushback here is, while I see you guys saying these things, but to me, this already seems that you were establishing that there's an enterprise thing. There's already an enterprise entity or an executive sponsor that's kind of saying, we're going to use Power BI. I think that works in certain scenarios where there's a strong enough team to say, hey, we're going to establish a center of excellence. We're going to have someone from IT leading this initiative. But on other hands, if there's companies that with just an E5 turned on, all this stuff is like bottom up approaching. Like everyone just automatically has with an E5 a Power BI license. So the only thing someone needs to do is to navigate to powerbi.com and be like, oh, what's this thing? Download the software or start working in the service and saying, look at all the value I'm creating. And this is all in a vacuum. There's no like top-down approach. There's no like plan from the organization level. It just happens.
I'm not arguing or saying that this has to be an enterprise level thing. If you're reading implementation scenarios on Microsoft documentation, you want to organize what you do, or you want to see whether or not the Wild West in your company can be brought in and
100%.
And how do we put some things around it, or how do I learn what that ecosystem looks like?
Right.
All I'm suggesting is within here, there's a bunch of nuance of, hey, if you're brand new and you want to like look at this diagram, what are some key things we can impart on people that should be part of that process, or should be part of, potential requirements for this to work effectively?
And to your point, if everyone jumped on the E5 license, and if you want to have the Darwinian approach of survival of the fittest, and everyone's doing their Power BI, how do you make sure, in a sense, not that your process or your implementation works, but the right one does? I think that's kind of what you're saying. Like you have to set yourself up for success somehow.
And I think as this becomes more prevalent in your data culture, in your organization, there are decisions that you make. I think there are just key, moments in time where you spend more effort to move yourself up this direction, right? I think most companies, or maybe initially without having a lot of planning behind it, start at this personal BI level. We just have a report. I'm building some things that's adding value just for me. I think the next logical thing is, and this is why we teach this when we work with people, is don't publish anything to my workspace, because it's for you and you alone. If you share it from my workspace, you're immediately creating problems for the organization. So as like for me, some of the phase gates to get from personal BI to team BI is, do you ever need to have someone else work with you on this report? Do you ever need to give it to somebody else? If the answer is yes, then team BI is where you sit. So to me, like when you read the descriptions here, I feel like there's very clear like level ups as you go through each one of these.
I don't know. I think I'm finally, Seth, am I beginning to understand what you're saying? Yes or no? Or
come to the dark side.
Okay. So
maybe I'm just missing what you guys are trying to talk about here, but I don't see any issue here.
What I'm realizing?
I think you're. So this
there
is
no
saying.
issue.
No. There's no.
We're saying the same thing, but just different ways.
Yeah.
No, I
no, you're still wrong, Michael.
What I'm hearing you here. Let me use some of
use different words, please. I can't understand.
2 points.
Not understanding.
That's 2 points. Please use different words.
One is maybe we should just live. Maybe we should just live in this documentation, because it seems to bring the most polar opposite ideas. But secondary, like let me use some of the trainings I've learned over the years.
Okay.
What I'm hearing you say, Mike.
Yes, please.
Is that the documentation is very clear and organized and would allow you to understand how these frameworks and these things work.
I think,
right?
Yeah, I think the documentation is pretty self-evident based on the descriptions they give.
And I 100% agree with you.
So you're saying there's more things that are missing.
If we read through the documentation, I think our listeners would be very bored, because they could go read the documentation for themselves. What I'm driving at is, having a nuanced conversation around what are the leaps between frameworks, or the different things that we would say are important to understand that would enhance somebody's experience of
All right.
reading through this
This
documentation.
literally took me 45 minutes to figure out what you were trying to say. And I think I'm there now. Okay.
Well, guy, you got
Give
10
me-
minutes to
It,
go.
it
so
may have taken 45 minutes for
Jeez
me to
Louise.
articulate it in that way, right?
Oh, okay,
You know?
so give me some tangible examples. Give me from
the move from so the personal BI.
yes.
That's why I was asking. What's a prerequisite? What are things somebody would need to understand? You need to know how to build a report.
You need how to
You
power
would
query.
want to encourage people to
Yes.
use my workspace, because that's their workspace where they have their reports.
Sure.
They learn how to publish.
Hmm?
They can refresh their own data.
A free
They
user can
understand
use
what a
that.
gateway
You don't
is.
even need a
Like,
license to get to
yeah,
that level.
absolutely.
Like just in a
Right?
vacuum, just
But
use
it's
it.
like those are core concepts that when you're going to choose that framework, you're putting a lot of responsibility on the personal user.
100%.
Give them learning, right? Here's the bookmark thing we want to point out. And it's not just like, hey, I'm going to pick this framework, boom, go with it. And people have to figure that stuff out on their own.
Agreed.
What I'm saying is, here's the key points for making that framework work successfully.
So
the next level,
yeah,
right, would be, how do I get somebody who understands the personal BI framework to plug into a team BI framework? And what are the different scenarios that we've seen of this being even implemented? And why is this, diagram a good form to walk through? And we can walk through the different components and talk about the challenges between them.
So, okay, good. I'm with you.
You want to do this in the next 8 minutes?
Not going to do the next 8 minutes.
This
Okay.
is why. This is why
we're gonna have to do more of these.
All this with. I have
Okay,
a feeling this one's going to take a long time to get through.
Well, I think I'm having a problem with some of the content or some of the things we're talking about today, because I don't think this is a level up scenario where you go from personal to team to department. Okay.
I agree. Okay. But when I say level up, what
Yeah.
I'm saying is,
I think it's leveling up.
It's very rare, like in this scenario, a level up from personal to team.
Yeah, like
I think it always is going to happen.
Yes.
Right. Unless you're a single person in a company and
Sure.
nobody else looks at your reports, then you're in this.
No,
silo.
but
regardless,
that's not the case.
Regardless, everyone's got. If you come into this from knowing nothing, you have to understand the fundamentals of what personal BI is, right? I have to understand what Power Query is. I got to understand how to make a model, and then I need to start learning at some level of like, okay, let's break the model and the thin reports apart. So to me, I see this as you work your way up, personal, team, departmental, and enterprise, all you're doing is you're adding more training, more structure around the core things that you already know at personal BI level things. Tommy, you're going to tell me you're going to tell me you're going to have a departmental guy roll in here and not have Power Query experience? Or a departmental BI. See, that's what I'm saying though. That's not
what I'm saying.
That's a prerequisite for much earlier in the in the personal BI stuff.
You were so close to the dark side, Tommy. Why are you moving away from me?
No, because you're making the assumption if you're personal BI, that means that it's only one necessarily person doing their own thing.
The skills of filter context, DAX measures,
personal.
Yeah,
Hold on.
All those things are relevant at the personal BI level and should be started there first, because I don't want to hire people into departmental BI if they don't understand filter context.
No, but that personal person, because the things that they talk about in the documentation for the personal BIs, don't use your don't use your own workspace. Choice of authoring.
No, it says use your own workspace.
The reliance on the personal workspace.
It's personal BI
as the analytical sandbox, but that's for like it's very much for like my own BI.
100%.
Right,
personal.
But, sure, but what
person, you like one person, like uno. Hey,
right,
what is it in Italian? Due, no, uno.
Una.
Yes. Yeah, see, one person. Persona.
All right.
Personality. Yes. Hold on, but let's take a step back. Personal BI. The connotation is I'm doing it for me, or for not necessarily that I'm delivering
100%
for the company.
Yes.
So
for you.
Right. But I think in a lot of situations in my head, if you're doing Power BI at a company, you're not just doing it for yourself. Where there's
exactly my point.
Yes. What you just described. What you just described is team or organizational or what you've done is you're mixing terms. Because what you described there is automatically a different group.
No, I'm not mixing terms. You can be doing the departmental BI, but only be one person.
Sure.
But
Okay.
it's the content you create and how it's being shared is what's
How it's
delineating between the two.
deployed, how you're
delivery, though.
implementing the content. It doesn't necessarily mean you have a team on every department, which I think there's scenarios for that. But you have to. What I was trying to say, who knows when in this conversation was, if you are developing Power BI organization, you need to set up the process and the expectations for the company, because at some point that's going to break. If you're doing it just for yourself, if I'm just doing Power Query, right? Well, I should have a process set up for it to scale. And you need to be thinking about that. Not that I'm building one report today, but I'm probably going to have 20 reports next year. And how are those going to be managed?
But I don't think
I should be thinking about that as one person.
You should
if
be.
I'm the one deploying content.
But I think you learn that perspective after you've been doing it for a while.
I think you're conflating parts of the article.
Yes.
Right? What you're talking about is content management and deployment.
Yes.
We're talking about collaboration right now.
Okay.
Yes, you can be a single person that
it's very hard to collaborate on your own, but yes,
manages company information and reporting and deploys it to the company. At which point, I think all of us are in agreement that doesn't come from my workspace.
Yes, right? Exactly right. Yes.
There's where we can, there's our level ground.
So now that we've taken the first podcast to walk through the overview and maybe two parts of the content collaboration and delivery.
It feels like this is going to be a number of other topics we're going to kind of walk through here as we'll hone in on some more of these key areas.
I wonder if this actually speaks to the complexity of this, or we're just that dumb. Like, the reason why all of us are, in a sense, not being able to
I don't
connect on
I don't think it's because we're dumb.
I think a lot of pieces.
Yes.
Man.
Yeah.
I think there's perspectives that we have on this too, right? Your experience has taught you a certain way of thinking about how this works. And I think the fact that we have very different background experiences, leading different teams to do different stuff, has affected how we perceive these things. And I think that's why this is a good article, because it's actually defining, like, written down certain areas that are like, and again from Matthew Roach's comments, this is an article that's heavily written by Melissa Coates. Melissa has worked with many large organizations that have spent a ton of time, and these are like the common patterns that are observed across many organizations. So I feel like, yes, these are generally what's applicable, but if going into the nuance of the items here, like, what is personal BI? What does that really mean? What are the checkpoints or the items, or how do you know when you're starting to verge on getting into team BI kind of stuff? Those might be a little bit debatable depending on what your experience with the organization has been.
And I 100%, right? And that's where, like, one of the personal BI things I would say is, like, core tenets. How do you go through the learning?
Yes.
Learn Power BI desktop, but learn the service parts. And some comments, in the YouTube chat as well. Like, most people don't understand the service or what it's for, or that they can refresh things, or, like, there's a whole area that they don't understand or how to use effectively. So how, if you drop them into a team collaboration environment, would they be able to be effective or understand how to collaborate with one another effectively? Because that's part of an implementation, is you want to make sure that if you are setting up a framework for team collaboration, that people aren't sending PBIX files all around to each other because they don't know that the service even exists.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And no, actually, I like where that's going, because I think about this in the context of, if I was personal and just starting off at the company doing this, in my head, I would want to be not necessarily preparing for the next level or the evolution of the BI team from 1 to 3, where I am creating data flows, or I am having these master reference tables if they don't exist. So when the company or the team does expand, because it probably will, that we're ready for that.
But at the same time, I could say, in this scenario between these two collaboration things, if I'm bringing somebody new onto the team, like our part of our implementation is that they understand how to navigate
Right.
and work through the personal BI workspace, and maybe you set up some like quick tests of things. Hey, what I would like you to do is go create a report, connect to this data source, publish it to your workspace, set up a scheduled refresh, and then let me know when you're done and we'll review it. Because that
Yeah.
forces them through that process so
Sure.
that they can become more effective within their own ecosystem, right?
Right.
And then move on to the team collaboration one, where maybe next time we pick up and talk about like the different parts of that ecosystem, because I think there's a lot of components that many folks may not even know are available to them.
Correct.
And
Teams, for
yeah,
instance, right?
and
Like all
right.
the different areas within that framework that can be utilized to make a really effective team implementation.
Sure. And my argument is you shouldn't, if you bring on someone to your team or change, you shouldn't have to change your entire implementation strategy just because you added one person. It should be able to, in a sense,
Not saying you are.
no. But I'm saying like yes, like everything you said, I agree with. But in my head, I'm also thinking you should also have a framework where it can adapt and you're not necessarily starting over again. But like, well, I've done everything this way,
I
right?
agree, and
Just for me.
yeah, and that's
You
and
know,
that's
and now that we add another person, now we have to change the data sources and the connections and
correct.
also how we're, doing
Well,
it. And if it
eh,
right,
I don't
well,
know.
no, well, hold
I'm
on.
not gonna 100% agree with you on that one because
Or if you, yeah, or the spokes conversation.
yeah. So
It shouldn't change everything that your centralized BI team did.
I mean
There should be an extension of.
agreed. I think again that's why I think a lot of this stuff builds on itself,
Right.
right? So
There's an evolution.
if I had to do this right, one of the things I would want to do is if I'm an organization, I would want to say someone shows up, we're going to use Power BI. Here's the bare minimum. In order for you to get the Power BI license, even to turn it on for you, here's what I'd like you to go do. Go to Microsoft Learn, go through this
Yeah.
article. Here, read this thing about the 101s of Power BI. How many people get Power BI without even going through that? Like, again, to your point, Seth, no one understands there's a service. No one understands there's a workspace. Just knowing those things are there are already, you're going to act like a personal BI person until you need to be a team BI person. And then at that moment, you start emailing Power BI PBX files around or putting them on shared drives and saying, open this up and refresh the data. Like that introduces a whole nother layer of problems. But then now you're trying to solve a team BI problem with a bunch of personal BI scenarios. That doesn't work. So having that education level to show, okay, here's where I fit and how to expand this. And I would also argue too, someone in the chat was saying, the different as you go up in these different data sources, personal, team, departmental, enterprise, your data sources likely change as well. Because if you're in personal BI, you're probably not getting access to the SQL server that has all the data in it or production level things. And you probably don't have an enterprise data warehouse that's collecting a bunch of data from the ERP system and shaping it for data things, right? So there's potential other infrastructure pieces that you will get access to as you move up in these different levels because there is more ETLing or transformations of data that need to occur outside of Power BI.
Right.
So to me, like there's a lot of other considerations here that I'm having an aha moment about right now.
So we used to share back in the day Power Query code, and we would save the text files in a shared folder for our BI team. Again, before data flows existed, it was for like our master, like our accounts and their partner status. And the thing, it wasn't in SQL, so I had to go through 3 different queries, and for every report. And I think you couldn't copy and paste the query back in the day. And so we literally share this code. And it's like you have to implement this every single time. And then when something changed, I say that because, again, I think regardless of what level you're at or what part of the evolution you're at, you need to be thinking for like the greater scale. Where if you were enterprise, do you have something at least set up where the machine can keep working, where you're not pausing or breaking? If there's you have to adapt.
So I think this is why you want to listen to the Explicit Measures podcast, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't. Like
or read the article beforehand,
or read the article, whatever. But I mean, I think that's why you engage with people that are a little bit ahead of you in different implementations, because they're going to tell you about things that you're just not aware of. Like it's important to be touching with or connecting with or talking to other people that are like, in a community. And this is why I think community is extremely important. User groups are extremely important because these are other individuals that have different experiences, different backgrounds. They have different pitfalls they've run into. that you can learn from. And so I think, Tommy, if you told me, you need to be thinking more enterprise when I first got into Power BI, I'd be like, baloney. I don't need that. I'm just going to build what I need to build and produce what I need to produce and share it through PowerBI.com. I'm not thinking about process and governance and like rolling things out. I'm not thinking about deployment pipelines. When I got into this whole space, I was like, forget IT. They don't know what they're doing. They're just taking too long, slowing me down. That was Seth, slowing me down. So Seth was from the IT. I was like, Seth, you just slow me down. It's going too slow. We need to be more nimble. We need to move faster.
Clipping my wings.
And now, after being in it a period of time, and now working with more organizations, I'm the opposite now. Yeah, I know. But you've also changed too, Seth. You've gone like a bit more my direction. Like you've been like,
hey, man,
yes, we need process.
Think like the business, act like IT.
Think like, oh man, that's a great phrase.
So we just went like this.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think we've met more in the middle though. Like I think we were both very far end of the spectrum. Like super process, super slow. Like just do it right. On the other hand, I'm like, go super fast, no rules, let's get it done. And like that's not, neither one of those ways are 100% right. And so what we're seeing now is the tooling is getting so amazing. It's so good now that you're able to see and meet in the middle now. We can have quick moving prototyping as well as plans for governance and management of content moving forward. Wow.
My last question, and then we'll go super quick, but none of this adoption stuff really existed with the SSRS, our classical BI conversation, right?
I mean,
but there was none of this complexity, man.
Yeah. Okay.
Like it literally was the delivery mechanism for reporting, and that's it.
Right.
That was it. Yeah.
Right. Like the only you had a few features that allow like let me auto generate the email and send out a report on a dynamic attribute. I mean,
right.
But even then, still
parameters and the report.
Yeah,
that's about it. Man.
But even to get to SSRS, right? The tooling was free to create an SSRS, but the server to run the SSRS report on was not free, right? And to do SSRS reporting, you had to have.
You still need Visual Studio. I think they eventually spit it off into bids, which would
a
free.
But even
framework.
But that's my point there. Power BI is free. You can download it for free. You can you can use my workspace for free.
Wildly different.
And I think that's
the
where
whole your ecosystem's at your fingertips for free.
Yeah, and I think that's
there's everything you need to take data and make meaning out of it.
Yes, I know, right? Well, the tools have changed the game now. We have clearly burned through plenty of time on this one, so we probably should wrap now. Have any other final thoughts? Should we wrap up for final thoughts here?
So to wrap up today, we covered the introduction, personal BI, and next time we'll talk about team BI.
Wow, we that was hard. I think we were all over the page on that one. Anyways, for everyone who was listening, I hope you found some value in what we were talking about, as opposed to us just arguing the entire time. So I guess it's we'll see. Maybe this makes good for. Maybe this is more of an entertaining episode versus an informative one. But everyone, thank you for commenting in the chat. We appreciate you participating and sharing your thoughts and your visions around these articles and things as well. So we really appreciate your time. Great comments. Thank you all for participating. Our only ask of this, if you found value from this, if you got a couple laughs out of it, and you felt this was helpful for what you were learning or digesting about Power BI, we recommend, or we would really ask, subscribe, hit the bells. That way we're going to be live. But we also recommend just share it. If you would, please share it on social media, whether LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever social media platform you use. Just let us know how you engage with the content, and just we appreciate you. Thank you very much. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Yeah, you can find the podcast anywhere podcasts are available, Apple, Spotify. We have a whole library now. And to Mike's point, we've seen some great feedback this week, and we really appreciate it. It's a huge help for us when you spread the word. So throw us a bone if you want. If you really do enjoy this, please share it, spread the word. We love the conversation. And if you're listening now, make sure to join us live for the conversation.
Yes,
sometimes, yes, usually there's a pretty awesome conversation on the live chat. It helps you when you're having your morning coffee or whatever you're doing, your espresso or your water, whatever tea you like. So that's where I'm going to end, because that's an...
And we're done with the words.
Beverage?
Whatever you need.
I had no rope.
Anyways, thank you all very much, and we'll see you next week.